Welcome to the Sax Channel. I'm your host, Scotty Stepp, and in today's episode, we're going to learn how to hold the saxophone properly. Let's get started. The key elements to holding the saxophone properly, doesn't matter whether you're just beginning to play saxophone or whether you're a seasoned professional, all the same elements apply. Now there are some exceptions depending on what we're doing. If you're a jazz saxophonist, this may be a little bit different. If you're a marching band saxophonist, it most certainly will be different. But we're going to start off talking about just the core elements as if you were a beginning saxophonist sitting down in band for the very first time and how to hold the saxophone properly. So let's get to it here. So when we hold the saxophone, we've got it out of the case. If you remember, if you haven't watched, you can go back and watch episode 1, Assembly and Disassembly, where I talk about how to set everything up properly. The thing that we need to review just briefly in regards to that is the neck position. So when we put the saxophone on the neck on the saxophone, if you remember, we've got the saxophone brace underneath here. It's this line that runs underneath the neck of the saxophone, and that needs to be right in line with the octave key post that's right underneath this octave key mechanism. All right, so, but if you're a beginner, we will need to move this, and everybody will move it slightly depending on how they hold the saxophone, how they're built. Just keep that in mind, and we'll adjust that in just a second. All right, so there are only, the thing I really want you to remember is there are only 3 pressure points or places of tension on our body in order to hold the saxophone properly. Because we want to keep everything as relaxed and nimble as we can to play quickly and nimbly. So number 1, we have 3 spots. The first one is probably the most obvious, and that's the neck strap. So the neck strap, the lifeline to the saxophone, the vast majority of the weight is being supported by the neck strap. Please, if you are a teacher teaching beginning saxophonists, I highly recommend that number 1, that you keep every one of your saxophonists that very first year in band on alto saxophone. All right, so many of you are going to want to put them on tenor saxophone, in some cases maybe even baritone saxophone. The real problem is kids of that age are still developing. And so the saxophone weight on a neck, which is basically placed all on our spine here in the back of our neck, is not really healthy, especially for bodies that are developing. But many older saxophonists, myself included, professional saxophonists, we have back pain from years of the weight of the saxophone on the neck. Now, so I really highly recommend that you keep beginning saxophonists on alto saxophone. If you feel like you've got to have them, you really want them to have them on tenor saxophone and baritone saxophone, there are saxophone harnesses that are made to take the weight off the neck, and those are great. In those instances, I would be okay with having a young saxophonist on a bigger instrument, and those saxophone harnesses would be great to have for alto saxophone too. If we could get that saxophone weight off our neck, it's great. When I'm playing baritone or tenor saxophone, I absolutely use a harness, because otherwise the weight of the saxophone on the neck it becomes too painful very quickly. So I recommend that you use a harness. Now, one tip on harnesses. Harnesses do come in different sizes. They can be adjusted quite a bit depending on the body size. But you've got to remember, if you're working with beginning students, you're going to want to have them order a small harness. All right, most of the stuff, if you just kind of blindly buy on websites or in your local shop, it's just going to be the medium size, and you're not going to be able to adjust that down to be tight enough in order for it to fit their body. So just be careful of that when you're ordering. Pressure point number 2 is going to be our left thumb on the thumb rest. All right, so if I turn around here slightly, my left thumb is going to be placed here. This is the second pressure point or point of tension to hold the saxophone properly. All right, so, and then if I push here with my left thumb, you'll notice that the mouthpiece will go up and kind of away from my embouchure, from my mouth. And that creates the third pressure point, which is the teeth on top of the mouthpiece. All right, so again, to review, we've got pressure on the neck strap from holding the weight of the saxophone, left thumb on the thumb rest, and top teeth on the mouthpiece. All right, so I can move freely, and the saxophone will go with me if I've got enough pressure here. Now, to test whether or not your student or yourself has enough pressure with their left thumb here, all you need to do is come up to them. I will grab the top of the mouthpiece and try to move it. So just gently, I move it. If it doesn't slide across the top of the teeth, they've got enough pressure. All right, so we're not looking for a lot of pressure with the left thumb, just slight pressure to hold it in place. Now, I do recommend that you use their mouthpiece patches. Several brands of these patches. I prefer the thin clear kind, and I prefer actually the clarinet size, because it just needs to be a small patch on top. And the primary reason is that it helps me anchor the saxophone into my teeth. All right, so some students will have uneven top teeth, and that can become a problem, and these will just help kind of anchor that. So those are the 3 pressure points. Now, I know many of you are wondering, well, what is this right thumb hook for? So the right thumb hook, if we're just playing in band, is really just a reference point for our right hand. All right, and the only reason, the primary reason it's there is when we're holding the saxophone, we've got our thumb in here. If we're going to use these side keys of the saxophone, then my hand has to leave these pearls in order to go up and hit this high E key. All right, so that's why. So it's just a reference point for my hand to pivot. So it's kind of a pivot point. All right, so if you find yourself having a big callus here on your thumb from rubbing inside of this right thumb hook, you're putting way too much pressure here. Okay, we don't really want any pressure here. Our hand should be relaxed. Should be very, very relaxed as we're holding the saxophone here. So no pressure. Now we'll come back to an exception to that when we get back to marching, when we're discussing marching band. But for now, that will suffice. Hand positions, extremely important. I've had several students over the years come to me, especially marching band students, that come to me with all kinds of tendonitis issues in the wrists, because they've been playing the saxophone for years at that point and holding the saxophone improperly. So they've created all this tension here, and they've got real diagnosed medical issues with their tendons in the wrist. So this will help alleviate that problem. Number 1, we want to have our hands in a slightly curved, our fingers in a slightly curved position. So if you can just imagine, holding a softball or a grapefruit. That's basically the shape of my hand as I'm playing the saxophone. All right, so that's the saxophone hand shape. So if I'm doing things properly, when you're presenting this to your students, you want to tell them, place your left thumb on the thumb rest, and then you're going to curve around, and you're going to place the first finger, your first index finger, on the first pearl here, and then you're going to skip the tiny one, that's the bis key, and we're going to go to the middle finger here on the second pearl, and our third finger, our ring finger, will go here on the third pearl. So I've skipped one in the middle, and if you notice, I've also skipped this top, what's called the front key. Now, depending on what saxophone you're using, this sometimes will look like one of these pearls. So you'll actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pearls. We always want to skip the top one. Go to the second one with our index finger, our middle finger here, and our ring finger here. All right, so that's where our hands go in the first position. And again, left thumb here on the thumb rest in a nice curved position. We also want to look out for, if you're teaching or playing, we want to make sure that our wrist here is staying fairly flat. All right, so we don't want to let our wrist become in this kind of concave position. So I'll always have my saxophone students, when we're having one of our first lessons, I'll have them stick their hands straight out, and I'll tell them wiggle their fingers, and then point your fingers to the sky, bending your wrist, and you'll feel all kinds of tension created in this part of your hands and your wrists. All right, we don't want that. That's one of the big issues of tendonitis. So we want to keep this in a very flat position, or ideally even a slightly curved position, but flat's okay. So we can be here, and we've got a nice flat wrist to back of the hand. All right, so that's our left hand position for holding the saxophone. Right hand, we're going to do exactly the same thing, but this is where the majority of the problems really occur. Because again, coming back to this right thumb hook, we do not want to lift up on the saxophone with the thumb hook. That is not what that's there for. Never lifting, because that creates all kinds of tension in our right hand, which we do not want. All right, so for saxophone, all I'm going to do is slide my thumb in to the right thumb hook. I do not want to let the thumb go all the way out past the thumb hook. I want my thumb to be basically where my fingernail is, to be directly underneath that hook, all right? So if a little bit of the thumb is sticking out past the thumb hook, that's okay, but we don't want to shove it all the way up underneath this knuckle. We want it out to here, and I actually play closer to the outside of this versus the inside, all right? So if that's my thumb position for my right hand, again, mimicking the left hand, slightly curved hand, thumb underneath the thumb hook, and then we've got first pearl, first finger, second finger, third finger, all right? One thing to watch out for your students and yourself if you're playing is to make sure that your finger is not going past this pearl. We don't want to be on the inside of the pearl. We want to be directly in the center of the pearl, or we can even be slightly to the outside. But directly in the middle is what we're really looking for, all right? So we're here, and again, nice slight curve position. And again, so this is critically important. If we put our wrist and we slam everything up against our body, we're going to create this kind of concave wrist position here, all right? So we want to keep it flat, if not slightly curved, and that'll allow very naturally our elbow to be here. We don't want to cram it up against our bodies, but just slightly, just kind of relaxed, resting somewhat against our bodies, but not pushed in, all right? Just a nice, comfortable position here, all right? So if we look here and here, this is good hand position for playing the saxophone. Again, left thumb here on the thumb rest, right thumb slightly underneath the thumb hook. Now, so that's our hand positions. Always, please, if you're a teacher, be checking your students' hand positions. Now, if you are teaching beginning students, oftentimes they're going to be, considerably shorter than adults. And where do we put the saxophone when we're sitting down? So the saxophone, the bottom of the saxophone, for beginners, if you teach them to put the saxophone in between their legs, that's not going to be very good for them, because for them, that means their right hand is going to be way down here underneath, probably past where their knees are very easily down here. So we don't want that. That's not a good position for them. All right, so we want to make sure that we're keeping the saxophone for beginners to the outside. There's absolutely nothing wrong with playing the saxophone outside our bodies. I will tell you, most professional saxophonists, we play with the saxophone between our legs. It's just more comfortable. It keeps our back from being twisted slightly. But certainly to the outside is fine. We just have to make a few adjustments. So what's often going to do, you're going to get the saxophonist to get the hold the saxophone this way, and again, they're going to be wanting to grab and hold. Same position, left thumb here. So if you notice, for me, if I haven't moved anything, my head is in this position, which you're going to see a lot for beginners. So we just need to make some adjustments. I'm going to loosen my neck screw. I'm going to rotate my neck slightly this way, tighten it back down, and I'm also going to have to turn my mouthpiece to be this way, all right? And this way, now I can have the saxophone come to my mouth. Raise my neck strap just a little bit, and to be right here, all right? So now everything's directly in line, straight ahead, and that's what we want. Head up, straight ahead. Not tilting the chin down, and we don't want our chin to be way up in the sky. This is where the adjustment of the neck strap is very critical. So if I bring the saxophone to my mouth and it's hitting below my lip, if I keep my head straight, now again, you'll immediately have students bringing their head down to meet it. We don't want that. We want up and nice and straight, and bring the saxophone to our mouth. So here, I need to raise this. So when I let it come to my mouth, it comes right where I need it, all right? Now you'll notice, I still have a slight angle, angle downward into my mouth. The saxophone is designed to have this slight downward angle into our embouchure, all right? So if I've got this too low, it's not that I still can't play the saxophone, but if I do this, so if you can see, I've pushed the saxophone out now away from my body, creating tension that I don't want in my right hand, and now the angle is more straight into my mouth. You'll see a lot of jazz players doing this. That's creating some sound concepts that they actually want for jazz, all right? So if you're a concert saxophonist in concert band, we do not want that, all right? So we want that saxophone angle of the mouthpiece slightly downward into our mouth. Now, it's not clarinet. We don't want a real steep angle either. We want it just a slight angle, all right? So again, if I'm sitting down, I have the saxophone out away from my body. I will have the beginner set up, so everything's straight like we talked about in the mouth. Left thumb, I'll have them wave to mom with the right hand because they don't need it. The right hand is not needed to hold the saxophone properly. We don't need to push the saxophone out away from our, forward towards you in the camera. It will fall back to its natural position. All right, that's what we want. Now again, if you're playing tenor saxophone, if you're playing baritone saxophone, that's going to be slightly different because of the length of those instruments. When they come back naturally, then my right arm and my right hand end up being way back here, and so my right shoulder, after not much playing, will start to actually fall asleep. My right arm start actually falling asleep. So in that case, I will push the saxophone kind of towards the front of my body just slightly, so my arm isn't falling asleep. But for alto saxophone, we really don't need to do that. All right. So here, left thumb, fingers, again nice and loose. The right thumb, anchor with the neck strap, anchor with the teeth. No problem. Perfect. Now, if you're an adult, a full-grown adult, I do think it's more comfortable to play the alto saxophone in between the legs. Tenor saxophones and baritone saxophones almost exclusively play to the outside of their bodies. If you're a taller student, I have seen taller students play tenor between their legs, and it's very comfortable for them. For me, it's never been really comfortable. But again, as long as you're maintaining these key elements with our hand positions and our thumbs, it's no problem. So, but playing between the legs, exact same concepts apply. I'll just need to readjust my neck, adjust my mouthpiece, and again, I'm here. Now, the difference is now between my legs is that the bottom of the saxophone is actually resting against my body. So what happens is this E-flat key guard here is actually resting against my body, which is absolutely fine. That's something that will happen when we're standing up as well. So the one thing we do have to be aware of, if you're wearing any kind of loose clothing, then what happens is, sometimes if we play an E-flat, our clothing get caught up underneath the E-flat key, and then we've got some other issues with the saxophone not playing properly. But this resting up against our bodies is fine. Just be aware that if we're playing an E-flat, either in the middle of the horn or the low part of the horn, that because our body is up against the horn here, that note is going to be flat. So if we're playing an E-flat down here, I actually want to push the bottom of the horn away from my body to allow it to become better in tune. Now, if you're doing something very quickly, going up a very quick passage, you're not going to do that. But if you're just sitting on a nice long, low E-flat or middle E-flat, then you can just slightly push it away from your body. You can experiment with this, and you'll hear the pitch change as you do this. No problem. All right. So if we're standing up, same principles apply. So we're going to stand up. In this case, I want the E-flat key guard that we just talked about to be right in line with my right leg. So it's not going to be in the center of my body. It's actually going to be off to the right of my body. All right. So same thing here. Left thumb, right thumb slides in, very relaxed. Hand position's very relaxed here. All right. Resting up against for me, it basically hits right where my belt is. No problem. Slide in. Now I'm very relaxed. My hands are very relaxed and very, very loose and ready to go. All right, let's talk about marching band. So if we're holding the saxophone in marching band, some of these key things that I've talked about have to change. All right, so because we're marching with the instrument, if I allow the bottom of the saxophone to rest against my body, it's going to bounce as I move. So we really can't do that. But what I see most often with marching bands, they want that saxophone right in the middle of their body, and then they push it out away from their body. Now, while that might look good, which I know is a key element, the problem is the moment that I move this instrument to the center of my body, right? So I'm here and I move it to the center, you'll notice that my wrist becomes concave. And this is where the vast majority of hand problems become apparent over years of playing. So if I'm off to the right, everything is good, which is why we hold it off to the right so my wrist is in a nice flat position. The moment that I move it to the middle of my body, we start supporting the saxophone with lots of tension in our right hand. And we're often lifting here with a marching band, which we don't need to do. All right, so letting the weight of the saxophone be on our neck strap. All right, so if when I'm working with marching bands, what I highly recommend is that we allow the saxophone to be off to the right side of our body, and then we push it away from our body just slightly. All right, so if you'll notice, I do have some space between my body and the saxophone. You know, maybe just an inch or two. We don't need much because now I can march around and it not be up against my body. All right, so again, I'm trying to keep a minimal amount of pressure off my right hand, but even as important, the moment that I have the saxophone pushed away from my body, if I'm in the right position with this downward angle, with my head nice and straight, the moment that I push the saxophone away from my body at the bottom, one of two things has to happen. Either I have to raise my chin to allow that saxophone to be away from my body, or I have to lower my neck strap so that I can push this away from my body and still have it in the right position. But the moment that I do that, you'll notice the angle of my mouthpiece starts to change, all right? So we're changing, and now we're becoming more straight in. So I see several marching bands where they actually will have this pushed way away from the body. So they want this line of the saxophone here to be parallel with their body. Now if I come back into camera view so you can see this, if I'm here and my head is nice and straight, you'll see where it's hitting me. It's hitting me above the lip. So I actually have to lower this neck strap so much to get it into this position. And now look at the angle of the mouthpiece of my mouth. This is no good. This is going to create all kinds of sound production issues and response issues, especially in the bottom range of the saxophone. Now, if you're a jazz saxophonist, we're working with a softer reed, a bigger mouthpiece, so that's not going to create nearly as many problems, but we don't play jazz saxophone on the marching band field the vast majority of the time. So we're looking for a nice blending concert saxophone sound. So and holding the saxophone in that way is really not what we want to do. It's just way too many bad habits that we have to break later on, and that certainly those bad habits are going to bleed over into your concert band performances. So again, just a quick overview. Marching band, we really want to push the saxophone away from our bodies just slightly at the bottom, keeping it off to the right side of our body, so for wrist position, so it's nice and natural. All right, and then I just recommend that when we do that with marching band, that we just raise our chin just slightly, all right? Which is often what we want anyway. I've worked with marching bands several times, and I've never had a judge, when I had my saxophone sections doing this, complain about the saxophone being off to the right. Again, we're looking for a uniform saxophone position across each like instrument group. For tenor saxophone, the same things apply, except for tenor saxophone, often they're going to be off to the right side of the body anyway, so that's going to give us a little bit better position. All right, but again, we're going to have to put some pressure with our right thumb that we don't really want, but it's just kind of the nature of the beast with marching band. So just do your best to really kind of watch, because in the long run, it's really going to be much physically much better for our young players' bodies. And basically that covers everything that you need to know about holding the saxophone properly. So a little bit later in a future episode, we're going to talk about embouchure position, how to get the saxophone, you know, with a good, nice, even tone quality throughout the range of the instrument. But for now, thank you for tuning in. Please remember to subscribe. I'm Scotty Stepp, and this is the Sax Channel. Thank you.